The slap came without warning. At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé smiled confidently, wrapped an arm around her waist, and said to his boss, "This is Nancy's father. He's an unemployed loser, retired, lives modestly." The words landed harder than any insult I had heard in my life. The room didn't go silent right away. Crystal glasses still clinked. Soft music floated through the ballroom. People laughed, unaware that something irreversible had just happened. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I simply looked at the man who had just reduced my entire life to a punchline and waited. His boss turned toward me. He studied my face for a moment. Then his eyes dropped to my cufflinks. I watched recognition spread slowly, like a shadow creeping across his expression. Then he smiled. "Good to see you, partner," he said, placing a hand firmly on my shoulder. The groom froze. Color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around us, conversation stalled. Heads turned. People sensed something was wrong. "Partner?" the groom finally croaked. His boss didn't look at him. Not yet. Instead, he kept his hand on my shoulder and said calmly, clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You still don't know who you're talking to, do you?" That was the moment I knew this wedding would never be remembered for love, vows, or champagne. It would be remembered for consequences. You see, all evening I had played my role perfectly. The quiet father, the modest retiree, the man who ordered simple food and listened more than he spoke. I let the groom lecture me about ambition. I let him explain success as if he'd invented it. I let him call people my age dead weight. Not once did I correct him. Because men like him don't learn from arguments. They learn from impact. This wasn't revenge driven by anger. This was justice shaped by patience. As the groom's boss finally turned to face him, his voice dropped, sharp and controlled. "You're fired." The word echoed louder than the music. The groom swayed slightly. My daughter grabbed his arm, confused, terrified. Guests stared openly now. Phones lowered mid-scroll. Forks hovered in mid-air. I stood there calmly, the same calm ID learned over decades of building something real, watching someone else's world collapse in public. I felt no joy, no triumph, only clarity. Because respect isn't optional, and humiliation is the price arrogance eventually demands. And this was only the beginning. I wasn't always the quiet man people saw at the wedding. There was a time when my life was nothing but work, risk, and relentless pressure. The kind of pressure that doesn't make headlines, but breaks marriages, steals sleep, and ages you faster than the calendar ever could. 3 years ago, I co-founded a technology company in a rented garage with a leaky roof and one folding table between 2 men who refused to fail. We didn't have investors. We didn't have connections. What we had were 12-hour days that turned into 16, then 18. We slept on office floors. We ate whatever was cheap. And we worked because stopping wasn't an option. I missed birthdays. I missed school plays. I missed entire stretches of my daughter's childhood. Not because I didn't care, but because I was building something I believed would give her a future where she never have to beg, never have to settle, and never have to measure her worth by someone else's approval. By the time the company stabilized, I was already exhausted in ways I didn't yet understand. The first 10 years nearly broke me. The second 10 defined me. The last 10 were about stewardship, protecting what we built and the people who depended on it. I retired quietly at 62. No press releases, no farewell parties, no grand announcements. I stepped away with more than enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I chose not to change how I lived. I still drove the same car, still lived in the same house, still shopped without checking price tags, but never flaunted it. Because I wanted my daughter to grow up understanding something most people never learn. Money is a tool, not an identity. I paid for her education in full. 4 years, no loans, no pressure. Over $160,000 in tuition, housing, books, and fees. I never once mentioned the number to her. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted independence. When she needed help with her first apartment, I wrote a check for $40,000. When she wanted to travel abroad for a semester, I paid for it without hesitation. When she struggled early in her career, I covered rent quietly until she found her footing. And I never once held it over her head. That was my mistake, because generosity without boundaries teaches entitlement, and silence, when misunderstood, becomes invisibility. By the time she met the man she would eventually marry, my lifestyle had convinced him I was exactly what he thought I was, an aging man who had peaked long ago. He never asked about my past, never asked how I retired early, never asked how I afforded to help my daughter whenever she needed it. He saw my modest house, my simple clothes, my quiet demeanor, and he filled in the rest with contempt. At dinners, he talked about money like it was a scoreboard, 6 figures, bonuses, promotions. He spoke about ambition as if it had been invented in the last decade, as if no one before him had ever worked hard or sacrificed. He talked over me, corrected me, explained the modern world to me like I was a malfunctioning relic. And I let him. Because real power doesn't rush to announce itself. It observes. I noticed how he treated waitstaff, how he spoke about older colleagues as dead weight, how he reduced entire careers to outdated thinking, how he believed respect had to be earned through titles instead of character. I noticed how my daughter laughed nervously instead of pushing back, how she started measuring success the way he did, through appearances, not substance. And I said nothing. Not because I was weak, but because I was calculating. I knew something he didn't. Men like him don't change because someone corrects them. They change when reality does the correcting. I had spent decades building systems, reading people, and understanding incentives. I knew exactly how much rope to give someone before they tied the knot themselves. So I stepped back. I became the quiet father, the retired man, the harmless background figure. And I watched as arrogance did what it always does when unchallenged. It grows. The change didn't happen overnight. It never does. At first, it was small things, easy to dismiss, easy to excuse. He stopped asking my opinion, not directly, just casually talking over me, finishing my sentences, correcting details that didn't matter. When I spoke about experiences from decades ago, he smiled politely and said things like, "That was a different time," as if time automatically invalidated wisdom. At restaurants, he ordered for my daughter without asking. He talked to servers without looking them in the eye. He snapped his fingers once, just once, but I noticed. People always show you who they are when they think it doesn't matter. He started using phrases that bothered me more than they should have. people your age, the old way of thinking, legacy systems. He said them lightly, conversationally, as if they were neutral observations instead of quiet judgments. When promotions came up at his job, he talked about older colleagues like obstacles. Dead weight, he called them. Men and women who had built the company before he ever arrived, reduced to inefficiencies in his narrative of progress. I watched my daughter's reactions closely. At first, she pushed back, gently but clearly. "He didn't mean it like that, Dad. He's just passionate." Then, slowly, her resistance softened. She stopped correcting him, stopped challenging his tone, started laughing along. That was when I knew the decay had reached something deeper than arrogance. It had reached influence. At family gatherings, he began offering unsolicited advice about money, about retirement, about what people should do at your stage of life. He talked about success like a ladder with only one acceptable direction, up, fast and loudly. When I mentioned that I was content, he looked genuinely confused. "Don't you get bored?" he asked once. "Not having goals?" I smiled and told him that some goals aren't visible from the outside. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. In his world, quiet meant irrelevant. Simple meant unsuccessful. Modesty meant failure. And the worst part wasn't what he said. It was what he assumed. He assumed my life had narrowed instead of deepened. He assumed my silence meant ignorance. He assumed my restraint meant weakness. And each time he made one of those assumptions, he grew bolder. He spoke louder, judged faster, dismissed more easily. I saw it clearly then. This wasn't just a man who lacked respect. This was a man who believed respect had to be earned through dominance. I thought about intervening, about pulling him aside, about explaining who I really was and what I'd built. But experience has taught me something younger men rarely understand. If you reveal the truth too early, arrogant people don't learn. They adjust their behavior temporarily and resent you forever. So I stayed quiet. I let the pattern continue, because patterns, when left uninterrupted, always expose themselves. And by then, I was no longer hurt. I was alert. The moment that changed everything didn't arrive with shouting or drama. It came wrapped in politeness. It happened during a dinner meant to bond the families a few weeks before the wedding. A quiet restaurant, linen tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of place where people pretend manners matter. He was in rare form that night, relaxed, confident, performing. He talked about his career nonstop, leaning back in his chair like a man already picturing his future corner office. 6 figures, stock options, promotions basically guaranteed. Then he turned to me with a smile that looked friendly until you felt the edge beneath it. "So," he said, "have you thought about what you're going to do next?" I asked him what he meant. "Well," he continued, unfazed, "retirement is fine for a while, but eventually people need purpose, structure. You can't just coast forever." I told him I had plenty of purpose. He laughed softly, not mocking, worse, indulgent. "Of course," he said, "but realistically, companies don't look for people at your stage. Maybe consulting, part-time, entry-level advisory stuff." Entry-level. I glanced at my daughter. She was staring at her plate, smiling tightly, saying nothing. That silence cut deeper than his words. He went on. "You'd be surprised how many older guys struggle because they don't adapt. The market's brutal now. You have to know when to step aside. Step aside. I asked him if he believed experience had value. Only if it's relevant, he replied without hesitation. Otherwise, it just slows things down. That was it. Not because he insulted me, but because he revealed exactly how he saw the world and my daughter's place in it. People weren't people to him. They were assets, liabilities, dead weight. And I saw, with absolute clarity, what kind of husband he would become when my daughter stopped being useful to his image. I paid for dinner, not dramatically, quietly. The check came. I placed my card down, and he didn't even notice. As we stood to leave, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Don't take any of this personally," he said. "I'm just trying to help you be realistic." Realistic? I nodded, smiled, and decided that from that moment on I would say nothing else, because he had just crossed the line from arrogance into entitlement. And entitlement, when left unchecked, always demands a reckoning. I didn't go home angry that night. Anger is loud. Anger rushes. Anger makes mistakes. What I felt was something else entirely. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't questioning his intentions. I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive or too old-fashioned. I saw him clearly, stripped of charm, ambition, and polish. He didn't just lack respect. He believed respect was something he was entitled to receive, not something he owed. And worse, he believed my daughter had already accepted that worldview. That realization hurt more than any insult. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was upset, but because my mind was active in a way it hadn't been in years. Calm, focused, methodical. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to warn him. And I certainly wasn't going to reveal myself early. Instead, I reached out to someone who had known me long before I became retired, my partner. He answered on the second ring. "Porter," he said, his voice warm with familiarity. "Still pretending to enjoy retirement?" I smiled. "Walter," I replied, "I have a favor to ask, and a wedding to attend." There was a pause, then a laugh. I assume those two things are related. We talked for a while, not about revenge, not about punishment, just facts. What my future son-in-law had said, how he treated people, the way he spoke about experience, age, and worth. Walter didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That kind of arrogance," he finally said, "has no place in leadership."
I told him I wasn't asking him to do anything. Not yet. "I just want you there," I said. "Observe, listen, let him be himself." Walter understood immediately. Men who build companies from nothing develop a deep respect for timing.
"If he's as careless as you say," Walter replied, "hell, hang himself with his own words."
That was all the confirmation I needed. From that moment on, everything slowed down. I stopped reacting emotionally, stopped replaying conversations, stopped wondering if I was being unfair. Because this was no longer personal. It was instructional. Over the next few weeks, I watched my daughter carefully. She was excited about the wedding, stressed, distracted, but there were moments when I saw doubt flicker across her face, small pauses when her fiancé spoke, tiny hesitations when he dismissed others too quickly. She was starting to see it too, and that told me something important.
This wasn't just about teaching him a lesson. It was about giving her clarity before it was too late. So I stayed silent. I let the wedding plans continue, let him preen, let him believe he was in control. Because the most effective lessons aren't delivered with force. They're delivered with truth, in front of witnesses, at the exact moment arrogance expects applause. And the wedding was the perfect stage. From the outside, nothing changed. That was the beauty of it. I didn't suddenly become distant. I didn't grow cold. I didn't raise my voice or draw lines in the sand. I smiled. I nodded. I showed up when expected, and quietly I prepared. The first step was presentation, not deception, precision. I chose a suit that said nothing loudly, dark charcoal, conservative cut, tailored perfectly, but not ostentatious. The kind of suit men with real power wear when they don't need to prove anything. Then came the details, the cufflinks, platinum, subtle, engraved with a symbol only one man in that room would recognize instantly. No logos, no branding, just a quiet marker of shared history. I didn't wear them for the groom. I didn't wear them for the guests. I wore them for my partner. Next came the gift. Not something sentimental, not something symbolic, something undeniable. A certified check, $50,000. Clear numbers, clean ink, impossible to ignore. Enough to signal value without explanation. Enough to make questions inevitable. I never mentioned it to anyone. Not my daughter, not the groom, not even friends. Because anticipation ruins impact. Meanwhile, he grew more confident by the day. He talked about the wedding like it was a corporate event. Seating arrangements, who mattered, who didn't, where people should sit based on relevance. He reminded me more than once to dress appropriately because his boss would be there. That amused me more than it should have. He warned me politely about not embarrassing him, about keeping conversations light, about understanding that certain people at the wedding were important. I assured him I understood completely, and I did. I understood that he believed he was standing above me. I understood that he believed I needed his protection. I understood that he believed he controlled the narrative. That belief was essential. Arrogance is fragile. It collapses best when fully inflated. The night before the wedding, I slept better than I had in years. No nerves, no doubts. Because the trap was already set. All I had to do was show up and let him finish the job himself. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, soft sunlight. The kind of day people believe is a good omen. He took it as confirmation. From the moment I arrived at the venue, I could see it in him, the posture, the confidence, the relaxed certainty of a man who believed every variable was under his control. He greeted guests like a host at a corporate gala, not a groom. Firm handshakes, measured smiles, subtle name-dropping woven casually into conversation. This is my director from work. That's someone from our executive team. My boss will be here shortly. Everything was about positioning. When he saw me, his smile tightened just slightly. "There you are," he said, scanning me from shoes to collar. "Good choice. Conservative. That works." Works? As if my role was to blend into the background and not disrupt his carefully curated image. I thanked him and stepped aside. He didn't notice the cufflinks. Not yet. Throughout the ceremony preparations, he continued playing the part of a man who had already won. He reminded the coordinator about seating hierarchy. Asked twice if the music was appropriate for executives. Checked his watch every few minutes, waiting for someone important. When his boss arrived, I saw the shift immediately. The groom straightened, shoulders back, voice louder, energy sharpened. This was the audience he cared about. He hovered, laughed a little too eagerly, agreed a little too quickly. I watched from a distance, invisible by design. At one point, he leaned toward me and said quietly, "Just a heads up when you meeting. Keep it simple. He doesn't have much patience for rambling stories." I nodded. He had no idea how ironic that warning was. Minutes before the ceremony, he took me aside again. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "I know this stuff can feel overwhelming. Big events, big people. Just stick close to family and you'll be fine." Fine. He thought he was being generous. In his mind, he was protecting me from embarrassment. In reality, he was standing at the edge of a cliff, smiling, convinced the ground beneath him was solid. I said nothing, because arrogance always reaches its peak right before collapse. The ceremony ended exactly as planned. Applause filled the room. Smiles, tears, appearances perfectly maintained. He kissed my daughter like a man convinced the future belonged to him. And then came the reception. Crystal chandeliers lit the ballroom. Glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped. The hum of celebration wrapped everything in pleasant noise. That's when he decided to finish it. He guided his boss toward us with practiced confidence, one hand on my daughter's back, the other gesturing toward me like an afterthought. "Walter," he said brightly, "I want you to meet Nancy's father." His boss extended a polite hand, still scanning the room. "And this," the groom continued, his tone casual, dismissive, rehearsed, "is her dad. He's an unemployed retiree. Lives pretty modestly." He smiled as he said it, not cruelly, not angrily, comfortably, the way people speak when they believe they're untouchable. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then Walter looked at me, really looked. His eyes moved from my face to my cufflinks. The room didn't hear the recognition, but I did. His expression shifted, subtle, controlled. The kind of reaction only someone with decades of shared history would have. "Porter," he said quietly. I nodded. He stepped forward, placed a hand on my shoulder, and smiled. "Good to see you, partner." The word hit the groom like a physical blow. Partner. He laughed once, too loud, too fast. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "This is Nancy's father." Walter didn't take his hand off my shoulder. "There's no misunderstanding," he replied evenly. "This man cofounded our company, built it with me. Half of everything you work for exists because of him." Silence swallowed the music. Nearby guests turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The groom's face drained of color. "That's not possible," he whispered. I met his eyes for the first time that evening. "Oh," I said calmly, "it is." Walter finally turned to him. "You introduced my business partner as an unemployed loser," he said. "In public. At your wedding." The groom opened his mouth, closed it, looked at my daughter, looked at the floor. "I didn't know," he stammered. Walter's voice hardened. "That," he said, "is the problem." The silence didn't break all at once. It cracked. You could hear it in the shallow breaths, the shifting feet, the nervous clearing of throats. 100 people pretending not to stare while doing exactly that. The groom stood frozen between my daughter and his boss, his confidence collapsing layer by layer. "I didn't know," he said again, louder this time, as if volume might make it true. "He never told me. How was I supposed to know?" Walter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You weren't supposed to know," he said calmly. "You were supposed to treat him with basic respect regardless." The groom's hands trembled. He tried to smile, to laugh it off, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "I was just joking," he said weakly. "You know how weddings are. Stress, nerves." I stepped forward then, not angrily, not triumphantly, just clearly. "You weren't joking," I said. You were comfortable. That word hit him harder than any accusation. You were comfortable assuming I was beneath you, comfortable explaining life to me, comfortable believing respect flowed upward, not outward. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she finally saw what I had seen months ago. Walter folded his hands behind his back. Do you know what worries me most? He asked the groom. It's not that you were arrogant. It's that you were consistent. The groom swallowed hard. I can change, he said quickly. I swear. I didn't mean any of it. I respect him. I respect you. Respect, once demanded, is already lost. Walter turned slightly, addressing me instead. This is your call, he said quietly. He works for us, but he disrespected you, publicly, repeatedly. Every eye in the room shifted to me. I could have ended him right there. I could have nodded once and watched his career dissolve in front of his colleagues, friends, and new family. But revenge isn't always the loudest outcome. Sometimes it's the longest one. I looked at the groom, really looked at him. Stripped of arrogance, he looked young, small, terrified. This, I said slowly, is what consequences feel like. I turned back to Walter. He keeps his job, I continued, on one condition. Walter raised an eyebrow. He spends the next 6 months proving that this moment changed him. No promotions, no leadership track. And if I hear one more story about him belittling anyone, he's done. Walter nodded once. That's fair. The groom sagged with relief so intense his knees nearly buckled. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. I won't waste this. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. See that you don't, I said, because next time I won't be merciful. He nodded rapidly. My daughter reached for my hand then, squeezing it tight. In that moment, she understood something far more important than wealth or status. She understood who her father really was, and so did everyone else. The rest of the evening unfolded differently. Not louder, not happier, clearer. People spoke to me differently after that. Straighter posture, measured words, respect that wasn't forced, but suddenly understood. The groom stayed close to my daughter, quieter now, careful with every sentence. The arrogance that once wrapped around him like armor had cracked, and beneath it was something raw and exposed. Humility, when learned the hard way, always looks like exhaustion. Later that night, when the guests began to leave and the music softened, my daughter found me alone near the edge of the ballroom. I didn't know, she said quietly. Not really. I told her that knowing too late was still better than never knowing at all. She hugged me then, not out of obligation, out of recognition. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something calmer. The groom kept his job, barely. He stopped boasting, stopped correcting people, stopped assuming. At work, he learned what it felt like to be watched instead of applauded, to be evaluated on character instead of confidence, to rebuild credibility one quiet interaction at a time. At home, my daughter changed too. She started asking questions about money, about values, about boundaries. We talked more than we had in years, not about the wedding, not about the humiliation, about life, about how success isn't measured by titles, but by how you treat people who can do nothing for you. I stayed retired. I kept my modest house, my quiet mornings, my deliberate pace. but something inside me felt lighter, because I had done what fathers are meant to: do not protect their children from discomfort, but from blindness. Years from now, people may forget the details of that wedding. They'll forget the music, the flowers, the speeches, but one lesson will remain. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. Respect without consistency is performance. And arrogance, left unchecked, always introduces itself to consequence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a punch. I let the truth speak. And that was enough.